All right, YouTube, it's the moment we've all been waiting for. Today, Hillary Clinton announced her candidacy for the US presidency. And I immediately was reminded of the fact that one of the most common criticisms of most of the GOP candidates, not all, and not all across the entire spread, but collectively, one of the biggest concerns is that they're all, it's always been the same thing. They're old, they're rich, they're white. They stand for outdated values. Well, you just described Hillary Clinton. There's the problem. And I think this is why when I'm looking at news of her announcement anywhere online, where the people commenting tend to be younger than the general population, most people who are in the older generation still use television more. They're not as social media aware. When I look at these stories, I see the majority of people there, including people that I recognize as actually being mainstream Democrats, are not enthusiastic about a Hillary run. The further left individuals want Warren to run. Some people want Sanders to run. Others want Biden to run because they like Obama enough to think that his VP should have the chance as well for a nomination. I see people talking about other candidates who are simply saying they all suck and we're tired of politics altogether. One of the problems that Romney had was not that his opponent was popular, because Obama clearly, during the last election, was not particularly popular. He had lost most of his support amongst independents. The thing that held Romney back and ultimately caused him to lose, especially in some of these battleground states he really should have won, is that he was not seen as an exciting enough and different enough candidate to actually energize the voting base. You don't need even necessarily to get a bunch of independent voters to vote for you. All you need to do is make sure that the people that already support you actually go out and vote and are enthusiastic enough to do so. I honestly don't see Hillary as able to do that. I would say most likely she won't even get the nomination. If she does, she'll probably end up being the Mitt Romney of the Democratic Party. That is, that even though the candidate she's facing may not themselves be a particularly strong candidate, somebody like Ted Cruz or Paul Walker, they would win anyway simply because she's not capable of getting the youth vote and things like that. I think another problem with Hillary is the fact, and we've seen this before, under pressure, when she's being criticized and hardballed, she performs very poorly. She does fine speaking when, she's got a captive audience. Most politicians do. She doesn't constantly make a bunch of verbal errors when she's talking to a fan that is either her fans or people who are more neutral. They're just sort of reporting on what she's saying. She doesn't have a problem with that. But you get her into a room in which there are people that are questioning her, that are critical of her, like interviews with the media can be, let's face it. And she tends to crack under that pressure. Rand Paul is having the same problem the first few days of his campaign. What's everybody talking about? He appears to have a similar problem to Hillary Clinton. The only ameliorating factor with Rand Paul's campaign is he is younger, less rich, less of a DC insider than Hillary Clinton is. That's the third main problem. She's seen as part of the Washington establishment. One thing that people have continually wanted is a candidate who truly is an outsider, who is either very junior at politics or maybe not even directly involved at this point with federal politics. That is what they're clamoring for. This is essentially different from the race in 2008 that was won by Barack Obama. When that race came around, the primary topic at hand was war versus anti-war. What direction do we want to take our foreign policy in as far as fighting goes? And the economy. It's the old adage, it's the economy, stupid. Clinton would do great if this race was primarily about the economy, but the economy has slowly begun to recover and has fallen out of people's minds. The two big issues right now that are going to come up in this race are, number one, foreign policy-wise, as it relates to relations with some of these other states that have been big in the news lately. Iran is one, Cuba is another. You can see Vietnam, Turkey, some of these other states, Saudi Arabians, Venezuela. That's one thing. She does have Secretary of State experience, although it's a pretty dubious point in her life when you consider things like Benghazi. And the other part is, do we want to live in a police state, or do we want to reform the way that the government collects data and do away with some of this unnecessary surveillance and really trim the budgets of groups like the NSA, if not get rid of them entirely? Hillary Clinton is a pro-war, she voted for the Iraq War, a pro-war centrist liberal who is also deeply involved with big banking. She's deeply involved with various corporate endeavors, and she's deeply involved with the insiders in DC. She is not a reformist in any way, shape, or form, and it appears that the younger Democrats, the under 30 Democrats, understand this. I'm not seeing very many of them that are very enthusiastic about a Hillary run. You go to, for instance, Salon's Facebook page. Now, Salon is far left, quite a bit further left than something like even MSNBC, and it tends to garner a lot of far left commenters. I have seen very few of them, even those that I recognize as being quite far to the left, who are enthusiastic about a Hillary run. They either say, well, it was inevitable, she's been coronated, or they say, well, you know, she's got problems, I wouldn't vote for her even though, because she's no better than any of the Republican candidates. I share this sentiment. When I look at the Republican field and I look at people like Ted Cruz, I say, these are at best mediocre candidates that are being fielded. Some of them are outright lunatics, like Rick Santorum will probably end up joining in. Marco Rubio's a fucking loon. Chris Christie's a lunatic. You know, Rand Paul stands out as being the one with common sense, and he has his quirks and problems too. So I look at the GOP field and I say, so far at least, it's not a particularly strong field anyway. But then when I look at the other side, I see that it's basically Hillary Clinton and then assorted nameless Democrats that may or may not declare a run. The thing is, all of these other candidates, many of them lack any name recognition, and then Hillary Clinton herself has so much baggage. She's getting towards 70. She doesn't exactly excite the youth anyway. She's going to have to resort to identity politics just to make a name for herself. Well, you know, campaigns can't be waged on just one platform. And that appears to be the hallmark of her pre-announcement and even now, you know, on the day of the announcement campaign, really appears to be a lot about gender-based identity politics. While candidates don't tend to do very well when their one platform is, well, it's time to break the glass ceiling. Yeah, it is. And a lot of female voters feel that Hillary Clinton is not the right person to actually accomplish that. It's like Sarah Palin. She was female also. And a lot of people attacked her, deservingly, because she was crazy. She didn't know what she was doing. She waged her own rogue campaign under John McCain, basically ignored what John McCain said and said her own things, putting words in his mouth, putting words in everyone's mouths. And she came off as basically like a bad stereotyped reality show satirization of everything rural and Republican. Hillary Clinton is the same way. She tends to attack those who could aid her in gaining success if they criticize her or question her even once, and she holds a grudge and never forgets it. That hit list that she put out about Democrats she wanted to get revenge on for not backing her during the 2008 campaign is going to come back and bite her in the ass. I would be willing to wager that there are a lot of powerful Democrats right now in DC and all over the country who don't want her to be nominated specifically because they fear that she'll get in there and she'll do basically what she did back in the 90s, which means she will run things. Anyone who doesn't give her her way at any given time is immediately on the shit list and will never recover from that fact. She will sick every available resource on them to cut them down to size and get them out of politics altogether, because she's completely imperialistic and egotistical. You don't even need to use the words from her no-go sexist list that her staffers put out like outdated. Well, yeah, she is outdated. She was, you know, in the White House back in the 1990s. 25 years ago she was in the White House. What's she best known for? She's not best known for her very brief time as a senator in New York, because she was just another liberal in the New York Senate, which is completely interchangeable, so nobody really cares about that. She's not really remembered for her role as a Secretary of State in anything but a partisan light, because most people look at Benghazi and they say it was at least fishy, and so they don't particularly like that. No, what she's best known for is having been the First Lady. It's not even an official capacity. It's not an elected position. She was the wife of the sitting President of the United States. That's what she's best known for. Now, her big advantage comes in the form of being able to trot Bubba out, because Bubba doesn't take shit. Bubba does not like criticism either, but he's far more gregarious. He's capable of pulling out a few tongue-in-cheek references and absolutely slamming somebody mentally without even letting on that he's doing it. He's a very shrewd man. So that's her big advantage, is she has Bubba obviously backing her. However, it did not work in 2008 against Obama, specifically because people got tired of DC. What people have been saying since the middle of George Bush's second term is DC is dysfunctional, the insiders are corrupt, the government is the problem. It's not the solution. We don't need more rules, we don't need more regulations, we don't need more taxes, we need less of everything. We need less government, because it appears now that the government has become the primary factor in destroying the economy, creating a bunch of wars that we never needed to be involved in, and screwing us over on the domestic front. Hillary is not that kind of reformer that can actually give you what you want if you want to do away with the sort of police state mentality, because she's all for it. She was for the Iraq War. Then she came out and said, oh, well, yeah, it's a bad idea, but she voted for it. She was all in support of it back in 2003 and never had a problem with it, which shows that she was able to work with George W. when it was politically expedient to do it, because he had the capability to force people to vote for the war, because his approval was so high after 9/11, so nobody cared. Instead of taking a stand like a very small number of people did, Hillary decided to simply vote for it. She's a pro-war candidate, almost jingoistic actually. She's egotistical. And she's not a particularly skilled debater either, when you think of it, because when she does get criticized, she tends to go off script and wage a bunch of passive-aggressive attacks on other people. Now, this isn't to say that I see many people in the GOP field that are particularly better. There's no possible way I would ever vote, for instance, for somebody like Jeb Bush, because it's the same thing. You've got an older, rich individual who stands for DC insider and corruption, and is a Bush, which really is a turn-off when it comes to a Jeb run. It's the same as with Hillary. You've got a dynastic individual who is running on their family name. That's the problem. There's nothing that could get me to vote for Ted Cruz, because Ted Cruz, well, for one thing, he's a Canadian. He's not actually eligible to be the president. That's my strong belief, and thus even if I liked him as a candidate, I couldn't vote for him because I think it's illegal for him to actually hold that office. Marco Rubio, he has no idea what he's talking about. His foreign policy fixture is completely screwed up on things like Cuba. Now, here's the thing. It also matters how Obama does for the rest of his tenure in office. If Obama does very, very well for the foreseeable future, and his approval inches back above 50%, then it probably means we will get a Democrat in office, or at least there's a better possibility of that. If his approval stays where it's at now or continues to decline, there will be some individuals who will say, enough of the Democrats, it's Republican time. Of course, I'm not going to do that, because I look back and I say, well, that's sort of the going ethos that got Obama elected after Bush did so poorly, and look at what happened with that. So it's nonsensical to do that. But there will be people who will say that. So it also depends what Obama does. Now, necessarily, Obama would be sort of beholden to Hillary for trotting out Bubba on his behalf when his approval really truly was tanking, in 2014. And at the same time had held the Secretary of State position, so they're sort of intertwined politically. So I wouldn't be surprised. She might trot out Obama as a supporter. But she's only going to do that if Obama makes the very good decision of sticking with foreign policy for his last year in office and avoids domestic issues. Every time Obama talks about domestic issues, people are immediately reminded of the post-Sandy Hook failed gun ban. They're reminded of Obamacare and how bad the rollout was for that. They're reminded of the NSA. They're reminded of whistleblowers. They're reminded of all sorts of corrupt bullshit that's gone on during the Obama administration that made him less popular. When people think of Obama's foreign policy, it's a little bit better because people generally think he's doing well on Cuba. He's at least attempting to get a deal with Iran. He hardballed the Russians and he ultimately screwed their currency. He's gotten us into a trade deal with Vietnam that for a very long time was, considered an enemy state and now has completely normalized relations and doesn't give a fuck and drinks Coca-Cola. So Obama's foreign policy has actually been decent. In fact, when he started focusing in this last year on foreign policy, my opinion of Obama went from, 1 out of 10 shit president to at least a 3 or a 4 out of 10. I guess as long as he's sticking with foreign policies, he's actually getting something accomplished. Which means I don't like him as a president. I don't think that he's doing even an average job overall as president, but he's getting there by virtue of abandoning the social issues on which his views are plainly and clearly wrong. Hillary Clinton, however, is a fiscal liberal. And in a race that details specifically social issues where people want reform, and foreign policy issues that really don't have anything to do with the economy and have more to do with weapons of mass destruction and things like that, Hillary is likely to perform poorly. That, I think, is going to be the last nail in the coffin of her campaign. I think that there are other individuals within the Democratic Party that have the capability to usher in the kind of reformist attitude that she lacks. I think that if Bernie Sanders were to run, he would get nominated. I truly believe that. I realize he's also old, although he's less wealthy. And he's an avowed socialist. But he could actually bring that spirit of reform to the Democratic Party that they're going to need to actually get anybody elected. Now, as for me, I'm still saying right now it's likely I would vote for the Libertarian Party. It's unlikely that I would vote for anybody who is currently announced on either side, barring Rand Paul abandoning some of the issues on which I completely disagree with him on. Because they're sort of a magic bullet that sort of destroys any chance that he would have of getting my vote. Specifically, his opposition to the Iran deal, which is it's clearly based in evangelism, and the same thing for abortion. Now, I think that's another thing that I completely disagree with him on. The thing is, as somebody who's a libertarian, I find myself getting split between these two parties, which both have some good ideas but mostly bad ideas. And so when I see somebody like Hillary, who quite clearly she's very pro-war, which puts her aside from many of the newer Democrats. She's pro-war, she's pro-big bank, she's pro-corporatism, she's pro-cronyism, she's pro-police state. When I see this, I almost say, my goodness, she should be running on the GOP platform. She'd be like a Ted Cruz almost. In fact, her views are basically the same. The only difference between Hillary's platform and Hillary's beliefs and the beliefs of some of the more far-right GOP members is that she doesn't engage on the other side of identity politics. She happens to be a Democrat and thus takes the other side. But these are wedge issues. They're meaningless issues. Many of these issues are already settled. We have equality in this country. The fact that there remains a pay gap doesn't mean that Hillary Clinton, by virtue of having 2 X chromosomes, is going to solve that problem. Because she's still constrained by the separation of powers. She's still constrained by the Constitution, much as though she wishes she was not. She's still very old. She didn't even support gay marriage originally. She was, again, like Obama, she was a civil union Democrat. Before it became politically expedient for her to support gay marriage. She was not an early and often sort of individual who by the 90s was saying, yeah, gay people should be allowed to marry. You know what's really funny? And people forget this. Remember Tipper Gore and her husband Al Gore who ran in 2000 against George W. and had been the vice president under Bill Clinton? Can anyone remember what Tipper Gore is known for? Tipper Gore is known for specifically attempting to insert in the sort of rating system that's used on music and TV and movies and things like that. She's known as the individual who tried to get them to list homosexuality as something that would get it an R rating. the inclusion of what she would term homosexual propaganda. She's a Democrat. Her husband served as vice president under Clinton. Bill Clinton, and his wife, Hillary Clinton. It's sort of the 2 degrees of separation here. That doesn't sound very progressive to me on these social issues. You can find more social reform in somebody like Rand Paul than you can Hillary Clinton, which is sad because on some of these issues, he's clearly wrong. He has no idea what he's talking about on something like abortion, and strays about as far as possible from a libertarian perspective on the issue. And yet, even he has that reformist appeal that Hillary can't muster, because she's almost 70 years old, she's very, very rich, and she is, regardless of how sexist they may claim that this is to state, she is outdated. And she's also a politician. It's more difficult to actually fulfill the sexist label when you're talking about somebody who's trying to obtain power over the public. It's like making jokes about George W. Bush's ears or his height or something like that. Well, that may be considered kind of rude and unpleasant if you're saying that to your fellow citizen, but it's a satire of a politician who did a shitty job and really deserved to be joked at. And Madam Hillary jokes are going to be rife. She's going to become the laughingstock. I can't wait to see what Bill Maher will say about her. Somebody like, any fucking comedian's gonna have a whole hour-long skit just made of Hillary jokes. She'll be the laughingstock specifically because her views are so strange. Her views are really, I hate to say it, but her views are more along the lines of something you'd hear from George W. or even Jeb Bush. In fact, if Jeb got the nomination and so did Hillary, it would be another 2012. It would be very difficult to distinguish between the views of the two candidates. And if you were to take their views, put them on pieces of paper and not tell anyone which candidate was which, there'd probably be a 50-50 chance that they would choose the wrong candidate. They wouldn't have a clue, no matter how partisan they are, because their views are so similar. So Hillary has announced her run. I would not vote for her under any circumstances, because I remember the Clinton era. And yes, Bubba Bill was a decent president, but there was that element of corruption constantly during that period. There was the interventionism. There was the obvious cronyism. It couldn't have been more blatant. As a result, there's no way I could possibly vote for Hillary Clinton. That's about all. Peace out.